Welcome, my dear students of class 8A and 8B. Welcome to history class. Today, as per the following points, I am going to teach this lesson number 2, Industrial Revolution and Imperialism. Now, here are the points mentioned in the blackboard. Is practically imperialism, reasons for imperialism, impact of imperialism, how many imperialisms were there? There were how many impacts were there? There were 5 impacts of imperialism, influenced over Asia, Europe, and Africa. The impacts which are there, we shall discuss it one after one. Impact number 1, impact number 2, impact number 3, impact number 4, and impact number 5. The first one, imperialism. What is imperialism? The Industrial Revolution led to imperialism. The Industrial Revolution led to a new concept, the concept of imperialism. What is imperialism? A tremendous growth in the production and manufactured goods in Europe. That is imperialism. A tremendous growth in the production. Imperialism means a tremendous growth in the production of manufactured goods in Europe. Manufactured goods in Europe. The newly industrialized countries could not sell the manufactured goods amongst themselves. Thus, they needed new markets to sell the factory-made goods as well as new factories, new territories which could provide cheap raw materials to manufacture more and more goods. This led them to acquire territories in Asia and Africa, the countries which were rich in natural resources but weak in military power. This race to acquire new territories by military force led to the rise of imperialism. That means powerful countries of the world had established their control over other weak countries by means of their financial power, by means of their muscle power. That means the weak countries who had huge natural resources but they are unable to utilize it properly. Powerful countries, in the interest of themselves, they decided to utilize the natural resources of the weak countries. As a result, they established their influence over there. Sometimes, by declaring war against them, they occupied their territories, their lands, and forcefully, they collected natural resources of the countries. And the concept from this act of war is known as imperialism. It was practiced by powerful countries, powerful nations of Europe, where there was industrial growth and development. In order to make it more and more, active, they decided to establish a number of colonies in Far East, in Asia, Europe, and Africa. And as a result, the process by which they established their colonies over there, this process is known as imperialism. Imperialism was a system where powerful nations occupied the weak and underdeveloped countries. European countries increased their power over new territories for their own economic and industrial benefits. These territories became the colonies of the industrialized countries. By the end of the 19th century, many territories of the Asian and African continents came under the yoke of colonial powers such as Britain, France, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Germany. Hence, colonialism was regarded as an expression of imperialism. The industrial revolution paved the way of exercising powers, establishing powers over other weaker sections of the society. That idea came, that idea was born among them who became industrialized countries, where a number of machines were invented by their scientists, where a number of factories and industries were established in order to get them much more benefited with industrial growth and development. They decided to make them more and more powerful. That's why they decided to utilize the natural resources of the underdeveloped countries, weak countries of the world. And hence, they enhanced their thirst for extending more and more control over Far East. A number of colonies were established throughout Far East by the strongest countries of the world, which got them benefited financially because they not only supplied their finished products to such places but also utilized its natural resources and cheap laborers for better earnings, for better development in their countries. So both the two concepts colonialism and imperialism, gave a birth of a new concept that was growth and development in industrial era, in industrial revolution by the powerful countries of the world. The powerful countries of the world utilize their financial stabilities, establish their control, political control, financial control over weaker countries of the world. Now, what were the reasons for imperialism? Scientific and technological improvements in steel production revolutionized shipbuilding and transportation. You know, scientific and technological development also have become a great cause for imperialism. It enhanced the aspirations of the powerful countries of Asia, Europe and Africa. The industrialized European nations needed cheap labor and a steady supply of raw materials such as oil, rubber and manganese for their steel industries. The fervor of nationalism also made rival European countries compete with each other for new colonies. Each and every nation of Europe, they started fierce competitions among them on the question of establishing their colonies over Far East in order to meet the growing demands of their factories and industries, in order to utilize cheap labor of those countries who were weaker, in order to collect raw materials from those countries where oil, rubber, manganese were available adequately. The industrialized nations also needed territories where they could invest their surplus capital. Hence, by the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, many of the industrialized nations developed trade relations with distant lands of Asia, Europe and Africa. which were rich in resources. Naturally, it gave a path of new international trading routes via sea. It also enhanced their capabilities. It also encouraged them to invest their surplus capital for better earnings, better growth and development in industry. As a result, the developed nations in Asia, the developed nations in Europe, the developed industrial nations brought a remarkable change in trade and commerce. Now, impact of imperialism, my nations. Impact of imperialism. There are certain impacts of imperialism. Imperialism had lasting consequences on the colonized nations. Europe and the world, it brought significant changes in the social, economic and political conditions of the colonies. A number of colonies were established by the European nations, European countries throughout Far East. So the countries where they had established their colonies, the people of those colonies were benefited with them since they utilized its financial resources from there. In return for it, they decided to bring all-round development throughout the colonies. They utilize their natural resources. First impact of the colonies, there were certain impact of the colony, of the imperialism. There were certain impacts of the imperialism, concept imperialism. What were the impacts of the imperialism? Number one, the colonies were exploited economically. Their natural resources were shipped to the industrialized nations and their markets were flooded with machine-made goods from the imperialist nations. This destroyed the local industries of the colonies as it was a blow to their self-sufficient economies. A number of colonialized nations lost their former glory and image since their handicraft industries where a number of artisans, craftsmen had been working, had been earning money and were able to meet their family expenses. Now they all became jobless because of supplying of machine-made goods throughout the colonies. Second impact of imperialism, the people of the colonies lost their political independence as they came under the rule of the foreign powers. They even lost their native culture, imported goods wiped out local craft industries. The influence of the powerful countries who had established their colonies over weak countries forced the people to be ruled by them. Naturally, they had to sacrifice their independent rights. Neither they could exercise their rights independently, nor they could earn money independently. They had to depend on the colonists. They had to depend on the government established there. So, the colonized people had no right to open their mouths. They were forced to remain silent. There was none to protest against that system introduced by the government. And third impact, the Europeans established themselves to be the superior white race that dominated the colonial races, especially the Africans, Indians and the Southeast Asian people, who were considered to be inferior by nature. It was a policy to conquer people they considered inferior under the guise of improving mankind. this was racial discrimination. The African and Asian states long suffered the blows of racial discrimination even after the countries became independent. The European nations and countries who had established a number of colonies over Asia, Europe and Africa, they considered themselves superior to the Asian and African people, and considered the African and Asian people to be inferior to them by culture, by language, by status. Everywhere they had to face insult. So it was a policy to conquer. It was a policy to conquer people. It was a policy to make them inferior. It was a policy of the industrialized nation or industrialized races to make them completely separate, so that they must realize that they were really inferior to the Europeans. The African and Asian states suffered a long, but they had to consider a great blow in the hands of the European masters, European states. It was nothing but discrimination practiced by the European countries. And some countries of Asia, Africa, in spite of being independent countries, they had to suffer such blows. What blows? Racial discrimination, what once was practiced by their former, rulers. Then point number 5, impact number 5. Agriculture in the colonies got severely affected due to imperialism. For instance, in India, commercial crops like cotton and other cash crops were grown to meet the needs of the textile industries in Britain. Cuba, on the other hand, was reduced to a country producing only sugar. So, a number of colonies which were established throughout Asia, Europe, Africa by different powerful countries like England, France, Germany, Russia, America, they all decided to utilize the lands of their colonies in order to serve their own purposes, in order to meet the needs, the growing demands of the textile industries. As a result, in Cuba, only sugar was allowed to produce. In sugarcane, this cultivation was done, sugarcane, because sugar also only one item was allowed for cultivation, that was sugarcane. And from sugarcane they produced sugar from factories and industries. And that very sugar, their masters imported, sugarcane they exported from other countries of sugarcane they exported from other countries during the time of requirement, and a large number of lands came under the cultivation of sugarcane in Cuba. That's why large quantities of sugar were produced from Cuba. So up to this, my dear students, these are the 5 impacts of imperialism. You please go through your book, open page number 26, and just keep on editing it up to page number 27. Thank you. If you have any confusion, ask me a question. During when I shall conduct my live class up to this, my dear students. Thank you. If you have any confusion, any problem, you let me know. I shall help you during when I shall conduct my live class. Thank you.